Miss Perkins is a friend of mine. We go way back. She's a little bit older than I am, but I would love to have Miss Perkins in the audience, and I would give her the stage. Thank you so much for coming to talk about my book, Silent Spring. You probably expected Rachel Carson to be some kind of gigantic Amazon warrior with combat boots and a big sword, rallying the troops to go off and slay the dragons that are devouring our earth. Well, that's not her. And now I'm sure some of you probably showed up just because you wanted to see that hysterical female that's running around like a chicken with her head cut off, running that the sky is falling and the earth is poisoned and we're all gonna die. Well, I'm really sorry that I don't meet your expectations of what you expected from Rachel Carson. You see, I am just a scientist and a writer, and these are solitary professions, quite suitable for a shy, introverted person like myself. You see, we scientists, spend our time in the lab studying and discovering the physical world all alone. And we writers, we do some research, but when it comes down to the writing, we lock ourselves in a room with nothing but words as our weapons to confront our subject alone. It is a lonely life and a little frightening. And then someone publishes your book. And then it becomes a bestseller. And then all of a sudden, you have to speak in front of crowds of people, and you're a shy introvert. And be perky, and tell jokes, and sell books. Well, I don't think anybody has ever described Rachel Carson as perky. And I certainly don't know how to tell jokes very well. But I do want you to read this book. I want every single man, woman, and child on this planet to read this book. Because everything I love in nature is in danger. And I need you to know. Now, I may be a shy introvert, but you know, we introverts do get angry. And I'm very angry about the foolish things that are being done to our planet. And so even though I am a bit shy, I shall probably rant a little before this evening is over, and perhaps I'll rant a lot.
It was written by Malvina Reynolds, but it was recorded by many, many, many other artists.
I am so glad to come back to South Carolina.
And lots of other.
You know, I worked for the federal government as a marine biologist for 17 years, and I know all the coasts of America, and there is by far no better place where the land meets the sea than right here in South Carolina in Myrtle Beach. I've written 3 bestsellers about the ocean.
Concrete gets tired of what it has to do.
Each one of them I have researched down here in Myrtle Beach. I always stay at the T&C Motor Court. Has anybody ever stayed at the T&C Motor Court? It's really a lovely place. Run by the Thomases, right there on the ocean. And they always advertise as Myrtle Beach being halfway between Miami and New York, center of America, of course. All 3 books I have studied and researched down there. The final book was called The Edge of the Sea. And I wrote it as a handbook for people who guidebooks. I wrote it because a publisher friend of mine threw a party up in Cape Cod. He invited all these great people that were from the academia. They were highly intelligent, from the Ivy Leagues.
Green and it's tender and it's easy.
And after having dinner, they went out to the shore, and they noticed that there were all of these horseshoe crabs stranded on the seashore. Well, now these are good people. They were kind people, and they went around and they picked up each one of those stranded horseshoes and brought them back into the ocean. They spent all night doing that, and when they got home, back to the house and feeling pretty good about it, they found out that they had drastically disturbed the mating ritual of the horseshoe crabs. Horseshoe crabs are around for 500 million years. They understand that what they're going to do on the sand, But these people didn't. But they are arrogant enough to think that they knew more about being a horseshoe crab than the horseshoe crab did. Arrogance. That is what we are talking about tonight. The arrogance of human beings. I wrote this handbook so that people could go to the ocean at any time and watch the wind and the waves make castles in the sand when only the birds could see them. Well, you see, to stand at the edge of the sea, to sense the ebb and flow of the tide, to feel the breath of the salt march as it crosses over your face, to watch the birds as they wing up and down the coastline as they've done for hundreds of thousands of years, to see the young eels, the old eels and the young shad run to the sea, is to have knowledge of things so eternal as anything on earth can be. Now they say that there is poetry in my books about the ocean. I do not sit down to write poetically or scientifically. I write as the subject demands. And if you find poetry in my books about the ocean, surely it is only because you cannot tell the truth about the sea and leave the poetry out. Did you know that I never saw an ocean until I was out of college? I was born in Pennsylvania, on a small place, and we were very poor. No indoor heating, no electricity, no indoor plumbing. I grew up on 40 acres with birds and bees as my best friends. And always I knew that I would be a writer. I don't know why. There were no writers in my family. But we were very poor, and I read in a magazine once that they'd pay you cash money if you wrote an article. So I sent an article in when I was 10 years old, and I won first prize, and they sent me cash money back. And I decided right then that that was how I was going to earn my living. Now, there was no money to send me to college, but I had a very smart mother. She took the family to China, down to the local girls' university that's just down the way, and she traded that China, and she promised that I would pay for my education once I graduated. Well, I graduated magna cum laude with a double major, English and science. English because I knew I had to make a living, and science because, well, I had one teacher. Her name was Mary Sinclair, and she taught science just like they did up in the Ivy League men's schools. She didn't teach dumbed-down home economics science for girls. She taught the hot stuff. And I tell you, my undergraduate degree in science is as good as anybody's from Harvard's. But when I graduated in 1929, well, there were no jobs for girl scientists. But I got a scholarship to Johns Hopkins University to do graduate work and a apprenticeship that summer at Woods Hole Marine Laboratory. And right then, that summer, I saw the ocean for the first time. And suddenly I had something to write about. Well, I went to Johns Hopkins in September of 1929. And what happened in October of 1929? Stock market crash. And all of a sudden, every single person in my family had lost their job. And they all moved to Washington to live with me. And I was the only one. I supported them on my graduate school assistantship. My mother, my father, my sister, her two daughters, my brother, his wife, and their young daughter. Well, it took me 3 years to get my graduate degree, but I got it. I was all set to get my PhD. My father died. And then my sister died. And I had 2 nieces to raise. Well, there would be no PhD for me. I had to get a job in the middle of the Depression. There are no jobs for girl scientists. But I went to a man named Elmer Higgins. He worked for the Department of Fisheries to ask his advice. And he said, there are no jobs for girl scientists. There's no jobs for anybody. He said, but I have a problem. You see, they asked me to write these radio scripts every week. And my scientists can't write, and I've hired writers, and they don't know science. Do you think you can write? And I said, well, I am published, you know. Remember that article when I wrote at 10? So he believed me that I could write, and all of a sudden I had a job writing 7-minute fishtails for the radio. And I parlayed that job into a full-time position in the Department of Fisheries. I took the exam, knowing very well that there were no jobs for girl scientists, but I took the civil service exam, and I got the highest score. They had to hire me. And so I went to work for the Department of Fisheries. And I was writing articles for them, and one day Elmer Higgins came in, brought me in, and said, you know, Rachel, this is horrible. This will not do. This is not good enough for government work. You must not submit things like this. And then with a twinkle in his eye, he said, send it to the Atlantic Monthly. They'll publish it. And I did. And they gave me a whole bunch of money for it. And some naturalists saw it, and they convinced Oxford University to give me a book contract. I was going to write a book, all because I couldn't write for the government. Now, it took me a long time to write that book because I had to do my full-time job, and I earned extra money writing articles for the Baltimore Sun. Do you know that the Baltimore Sun put an article every Sunday for 2 years in their paper on a fish? Because I had no time to do any research. The only thing I could do was thought it didn't work, so they published it. It took me a long time to write that book. But finally, November 1941, I published my first book, Under the Sea One. What happened December 7th, 1941? I didn't hear you. Pearl Harbor. Well, my book was met by the country with sheer indifference. I made more money in the article from the Atlantic Monthly than I ever did on the book. But I had the bug for writing. So I went back to my full-time job and my part-time job of writing the articles, and it took me over 10 years. But I finally published my second book, The Sea Around Us. Well, that one just flew off the shelves. It was 86 weeks on the bestseller week, 39 in first place, beating out Thor Heyerdahl's Kon-Tiki every single time. I had a runaway hit. And so they republished my first book, Under the Sea Wind, and for a while, I had 2 books on the bestseller list. I quit my government job and I started writing full-time. But of course, you did not come here to hear me talk about my beautiful books about the ocean. You came here because you wanted to talk about this ugly book, Silent Spring. I did not want to write this book. But you know, just recently in the newspaper, there was a reporter that was interviewing a Farm Bureau chief. And he asked the Farm Bureau chief, what do you think of Rachel Carson's new book, Silent Spring? And he said, nobody in this department has ever read that book, and we all heartily disagree with it. That's when you know you're really famous, when people don't even have to read your book to know what it says. It is an ugly book. It is about poisons. It's about ugliness. I had so many books I wanted to write, and I was a 3-time best-selling author. My publisher would have published anything I wanted to. But I got this letter from a lady that managed a bird sanctuary in Duxbury, Massachusetts. It's 1957. In 1957, they were drenching your South down here with DDT because the government had decided to wage war against the fire ant. Well, they didn't win, but they were waging war all right. 1957, they were drenching New England, trying to get rid of dust elm disease. They didn't get rid of that either. And over her bird sanctuary in Duxbury, Massachusetts, they would fly planes to get rid of the mosquitoes. They killed her birds. They would have eaten mosquitoes anyway. Her letter was so sad. Now, I've known about this problem for a long time. I worked for the Department of Fish and Wildlife. So for 17 years, I had been collecting information about pesticide in the wild. But her letter just got to my heart. And I said, don't worry, I will find someone to take this on. Now, I had been an editor-in-chief of the department, so I had a ton of contacts, both in the science industry, in the nature writing industry. I have this huge Rolodex. You don't know what a Rolodex is? Oh, it's all the rageous thing. You know, you have these little cards, you write the name down on it, you can put the birth date or something like that, you put it in this little wheel. And when you want to call them, you can just pick up the card and walk over to the telephone on the wall and sit down and talk to them. Now, in my case, I had a huge Rolodex with lots of contacts. So I would take the whole Rolodex over to the kitchen table, and I went through the whole thing. Hundreds of people. Every single one I called up and asked and said, oh yes, that's a book that should be written. But you don't understand, Rachel, that's dangerous. I would lose my funding. I could not do that. Rachel, it is dangerous. You are taking on the Department of Agriculture, you're taking on the chemical companies. This is a dangerous thing to do. I cannot do this. And by the end, I'd gotten through that huge wheel of Rolodex cards. And not one single one of those science writers and thinkers would step up to the task. Finally, I realized I was going to have to do it. So I went to my publisher, Paul Brooks at Houghton Milton, and I said, Paul, I've decided what I want to do my next book on, but I want to warn you, it is dangerous. We will probably get sued. And I don't know, people tell me my life may be in danger for doing this, but I'm going to write this book. And Paul only had one question. When can we schedule a publication date? So I went back and started writing that book. Now, it was not easy because I had no laboratory, I had no staff, I had no university behind me. I was just a single female with a Rolodex. But that Rolodex had great names in it. My mother was ill. In fact, my mother, who was the staff of my life, died during the middle of this book. And my niece had died, and I had adopted her 6-year-old grandnephew, my grandnephew, little Roger. And he was a little hyperactive, so I had to take care of him and my mother and write this book all by myself. It took me a long time going through it and reading it and finding out all these things because it was not necessarily my field, but the book had to be written. Now, I don't know if it'll ever make any difference. I don't know if one book will make any difference at all. But at least I know I tried. Now, what was wrong with these pesticides that they were using? They were flying over airplanes and dumping on everybody. These are the chlorinated hydrocarbons, starting with DDT and advanced into eldrin and dieldrin and heptachlor and chloridane. And they were, in World War II, the DDT was used to combat malaria, dysentery, and typhus, and it was a godsend. It saved so many, many lives. And when the war was over, we had all these extra planes and pilots, and somebody in the chemical industry decided a great way of selling these pesticides would be to put them on the airplanes, fly them over the field, dump them out all over everything. We'll sell more DDT, which is cheap to manufacture. It goes for at least 80 miles outside of where you are dropping it. As soon as it was released for the public in 1945, I was working for the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, and reports came over my desk about death of things in the wildlife, of birds and fish, great big huge kills in the rivers. And I noticed this, and at first I would go around and ask, and they'd say, oh, don't worry, we didn't know what we were doing, we put a little too much on, we made a mistake, it'll be fine. And then later on, they stopped giving that excuse. They started saying, oh, that didn't happen. What do you mean? I have the report right here in front of me. It didn't happen. No, I have it right here. I was out there in the field. Oh, we'll go out in a couple months and check it out. So I decided that the public should know about this, that this was dangerous. So I called up the Reader's Digest, and I said, I have this great article. It's important for people to know about it. I'd like to write about pesticides. Well, the Reader's Digest called me back and said, our readers don't want to read about pesticides and death and nasty things like that. Our readers want to read about happy things. They're not published in Pleasantville, New York for nothing, you know. So nobody would touch an article about this. And so I went on until it came to 1957, and I started writing this book. Now, what are wrong with these petrochemicals? There are three things. First of all, they are a wide-based killer of insects. Nature has a balance to it. We have our predators, and everything has a balance. So, but you're going to kill out all the enemies as well as the things that you want to be taken care of. Two, as soon as what is left over are the strong insects that have resisted it, and then these are the ones that multiply, and all of a sudden you have an insect that is even stronger than before, and you have to make chemicals that are even stronger to get rid of them. But the third thing is the most important. It's bioaccumulation. You see, these particular chemicals are stored in the fat cells of fish, birds, and mammals, including human beings. Every single person in this room has DDT stored in their body. It has only been released for 17 years. 17 years ago, it didn't exist. But our government tells us, oh, that's all right, don't worry about it, it's perfectly fine and safe. You see, the robin doesn't die because it is sprayed with DDT. The robin dies because we spray the elm trees, the leaves drop down, the earthworms eat the leaves and the dirt, the robin comes along and eats the earthworms, and the DDT that was stored in the earthworms is now stored in the robin. The robin lays an egg, it's soft-shelled and cracks, and we have no more robins. If it does, the males are genetically changed and cannot reproduce. On up the food chain to the hawks, the eagles, and to us. It is this that we are so worried about because the chemical companies and the government will not tell us what will happen to our future generations. Well, when they found out that I was going to be writing a book about this, the chemical companies went on the warpath. The first thing they did was send in the lawyers, and they tried to sue Houghton Mifflin and the New York Times. They both all said, she's got 55 pages of documented sources. Go ahead, let them sue. And you know what they didn't? But then they sent in the scientists in science robes and glasses, and they sat there and tried to say that I didn't know what I was talking about, that this was junk science, that I was not accredited. I have a graduate degree from Johns Hopkins. I have worked as a marine biologist for 17 years. I know my science. They were just mad because people read my book. You see, I wanted every single human being to read this book. So I wrote it so that anyone who could read could understand it. It is very simple to make things complicated. It's hard work to make it simple. But I knew the people that need to read this were the homemakers that never made it out of high school. It is their farms, it is their children, it's their houses that are filled with this stuff. One of the nicest compliments I ever received were letters from women who had never graduated from high school that said that they read my book and they were angry and were going to do something about it. Junk science, my foot, just because people could read it. And then they decided that they would spend money. They wanted that's what they're really good at anyway. They wanted a marketing campaign. They wrote a book called How to Answer Rachel Carson. And one page would have a page from my book, and the other page would be answers to the questions. And I looked at that, and I went to my publicist, Paul, and I said, Paul, there's more of my words in there than theirs. Do you think we could sue them for plagiarism? Paul said, Rachel, don't you understand? The more they attack you, the more people go down and will buy your book. So he laughed all the way to the bug with him. Then they started the personal. They called me a fearmonger, an hysterical woman. Oh, this one's really, really bad. They called me a bird lover. And they insinuated there was something a little strange about a woman who lived alone with her mother and a couple cats. Why, the Secretary of Agriculture, Ezra Taft Benson, he said, "Why, she's a spinster. What does she care about future generations? Why, she's probably communist." Well, I'm not a communist. Yes, I was friends with Frances Perkins, but I'm not a communist. But I am a woman. And you see, women are particularly concerned about this because it is their children, their homes, their gardens that are filled with these chemicals. My publicist was really smart. Before this book came out, she mailed a copy of it to every single garden club president, every single women's club president, and by the time that it came out, they had made their husbands read it. This is not something that I wanted to do, but it was something that needed to be done. This is not a book about DDT. This is a book about arrogance. It's about modern man sitting in his cities of glass and cement, thinking that he can control nature. Well, the control of nature is like trying to reverse gravity. It is a concept born in the Neanderthal age of biology. It conceived in arrogance, thinking that man has nature at its bidding. Do you realize in less than 17 years, they have invented 200 chemicals for the sole purpose of destroying weeds, rodents, insects, other things that we consider to be pests. And they are marketed in thousands of different names. Right now, you can go down to the Piggly Wiggly here, and right on the shelf, there is something called TEPP. It is a 40% derivative of a chemical nerve gas in a glass bottle, without any directions, without a poison label, more lethal than something you have to sign for at the chemist. It's right there on the shelf, close to the peanut butter and jelly. Now, I don't know about you, but I go shopping with my little Roger. He's a little hyperactive. If Roger Christie grabs a hold of that glass bottle of TPP and drops it on the floor, who knows what can happen? We consistently put sprays and aerosols and dust on our homes, our gardens, our farms. Things so lethal that they can stop the singing of birds, the leaping of fish, to coat our leaves, reach down to our soil, to run into our water. They should not be called pesticides. They should be called biocides. Now, I do not think that we should not control insects. Of course we should control insects. I just don't want to kill off all of us along with the insects. These pesticides are a low level of science. You see, they kill off, it's a barred base, it kills off everything. It is not smart. It is, they have side effects that are dangerous. And we can do so much better. Our scientists are so much smarter if they're incented to do this. Mark my words. If 50 years from now, in say the year 2017, the only cure we have for malaria is to continue to use DDT, we are smarter than this. Our scientists are better than this. Now, the problem that I dealt with in Silent Spring is not an isolated one. It is part of a sorry whole. The reckless endangerment of our environment with dangerous pesticides and chemicals. Until recently, we thought that somebody was looking out for us, that there were some standards between us and danger. Well, we've recently found out it simply isn't so. It is so easy to assume that somebody else is taking care of everything. Trusting so-called authority is not enough. It is a sense of personal responsibility that is important. It is a sense of personal responsibility that is important. It is the public that is asked to assume the risks that the insect controllers take. And so it is up to the public to decide whether it wants to go forth. And it can only do so when it is in full possession of the facts. And if the public decides that it does not want to go farther in this direction, it is up to us to decide which course to take. Knowing what I know, I cannot keep silent. It is a privilege as well as a duty to speak out. We have a fundamental right to a healthy environment. Let me repeat that. We have a fundamental right to a healthy environment. If our Bill of Rights contains no clause that a person should be safe in their home against the application of poisonous things by persons private or public, surely it is only because our fathers in their infinite wisdom could think of no such problem. We live in a universe today where the making of a dollar is never questioned. It is for us to take care of this deplorable situation. We must educate ourselves. We must learn. We must ask questions. We must question authorities. We must find out what the truth is. And always when you read, go down to the bottom of the page and find out who wrote it, why they wrote it, and ask them how they make their money. We are continually fed little tranquilizing pills of sugar-coated facts and things that are true and half-true and maybe not true at all. We must question. We must ask. Now, I really have no solution, and there is no panacea. I do know that it helps a lot for us to spend as much time as we can outdoors in nature, in our gardens, with growing things. I know that this is important. Now, some of you may think, well, this is a symposium about the power of words. Why are we talking about a book called Silent Spring? Is not silence the lack of words? Let me tell you, silence speaks volumes. This is not a book just about the fact that at some point there may be a spring in which there are no birds to sing. It is about silence. It is about the silence of our government and the agricultural business and the chemical business that tell us all the marketing facts of these wonderful poisons and hide from us the truth of what they do and refuse to explore what they may be doing to future generations. It is a silence the press only wants to write about happy things. This is the age of living through chemistry. This is the age of where the lily-white suburbs are filled with progress, and the only thing they have to fear is crabgrass. It is the silence, and this is the one that really hurts deeply. It is the science of our scientists, whose job it is to study and discover the truth of our physical world, and who money and funding are taking themselves away from that truth. But just recently, there was a young woman scientist. Her name was Frances Kelly. Just a couple months ago, she was the reason that the thalidomide controversy, the thalidomide structure never happened in America. Why? She was an underlying science person. And when it came across, when the marketing came across for it to be approved, she had a stamp. And the stamp said, not enough information, send it back. Not enough information. And for 2 years, she kept thalidomide off the shelves in America and saved our parents from that controversy. That is how science can speak out. To quote another scientist, who also happens to be a female scientist, Marie Curie. She said, we live in an age where knowledge is everything because it helps us fear less. Now you may ask me, well, Rachel, what can I do? I'm just an ordinary citizen. What can I do? Well, I can answer with another scientist, also a female. Margaret Mead said, never doubt that a group of citizens that are determined and committed can change this world. Because in truth, that's all that ever has. To sin by silence when one should protest makes cowards of us all. And I look around this room and I see each and every one of you. I know there are no cowards here. Now it's your turn to speak. What questions do you have of Rachel Carson? Well, you know, many times people refuse to believe that I was a female who could write a science book so well. Even though if you've read your Bible, you know Rachel is the name of a female. But they would always write their letters to Mr. Carson.
So, Don Speed, Rachel.
Hi, Don.
Did you ever investigate plant killers, like weed killers and things like that, or just insects?
Oh yes, if you read in my book, there are a number of, there's a whole chapter on herbicides, and especially the use of them along our roadsides. That this is, and it's something especially in our American suburbs, we are so committed to killing crabgrass that we market and market and market more and more materials for this. So herbicides is a large part of the problem. Yes, sir.
Very bad. George from Greenville. Ms. Carson, I've read your book. I enjoyed it. As you know, the man that invented DDT won the Nobel Prize for Physiology and Medicine. Do you think DDT could be used in concentrated or in small areas, you know, and alternate with other chemicals to fight, for example, mosquitoes and malaria?
Yes, and the Nobel Prize he won was well worth it. Of course it is. DDT has saved millions and millions of lives, and I have never said it should not be used. But use a little bit. Don't dump it out of an airplane. Target what you're doing. Use it. Oh, they used it down in the south here to kill your fire ants. Fire ants is a mound builder. You don't have to spray 80 miles of stuff to go down and put it around the little mound and kill it. So it is the overuse of the overselling of it. And I also truly believe if 50 years from now, the only thing you can use is what he invented 50 years ago, then we have not been very smart about it.
Thank you. Ms. Carson, I'm sure you know nothing about global warming or
Would you hold the mic a little closer?
I'm sure you would know nothing about global warming or aerosol sprays putting holes in the ozone layer, or such things as we shouldn't vaccinate our children for polio because they might become autistic, but these are not within your purview. But you said something. You said that it is arrogant to think that man can control the environment. Do you think that we can, even though it's speculative at this point from your viewpoint, do you think man can alter the climate?
I beg to differ with you. I have written about, I don't know the term you use, global warming, but I have written about the global thermostat. I'm a marine biologist. The temperature of the oceans is very important. Back when I wrote The Sea Around Us, I talked a lot about how just a small degree of temperature change changes the economics the fish move. And if you're dependent on those fish and they move farther north or south because of the temperature, then your economy is growing. I would think the government would be interested in that. But, so yes, the warming of the planet is something that all marine biologists are very concerned with.
But is it as a natural phenomenon, or is it man-induced?
As something that needs to be studied, that's why we have scientists. We must learn so that, as Marie Curie said, the more we know, the less we have to fear. So we must study this, and yes, it is something that concerns all of us.
I'm Lee from Charlotte, and growing up in eastern North Carolina, every summer I would get malaria, and then it started with the trucks using DDT, and the mosquitoes pretty much went away. Now, I don't know what else went away with them, but is a truck less invasive than an airplane, or what? What's your opinion?
But first, let me talk about your coast. I studied a lot at Beaufort. I forget which is Beaufort or Beaufort in. I think it's Beaufort in North Carolina. I studied there greatly. Your shore is absolutely gorgeous, and I've learned an awful lot from there. I spent a great deal of time there. And the question I already forgot. Sorry.
The trucks.
The trucks. The difficulty, especially when I started writing this book in 1957, they felt that if you could do a mass spraying, that it would take care of the insect problem. And yes, malaria is a problem. They put it on trucks, and I don't know, I think there are probably some people in this audience. You would run up through the suburbs, and they would tell you that if you just stayed in your house for a couple minutes while the truck went by, it'd be okay. But I think some of you here probably ran behind those trucks, just holding your breath, seeing how long you could hold your breath and not breathe in the DDT. Another thing that they did, and there are these wonderful parents that were so concerned about the polio epidemic that you know was going on and was just so brutal. And good parents decided that since there was something in the water, that if we just sprayed DDT while our children were swimming in the swimming pool, that they would not get polio. So they took great big huge hoses, and I do remember this, down a casino pool, and they would take the DDT and spray the kids as they were spraying in the swimming pool. Now, this is just not good science. It doesn't mean that we should not use things, but dumping them out of an airplane, and I guess your question, is it better to run behind the truck than the airplane? Well, yes, the truck sprays a little less far than the airplane does. But going back to the fire ants, they live in a mound. If you sprinkle it on the mound, then you did what you need to do. You don't have to spring 80 miles to get rid of those fire ants right there. So yes, the trucks came through, hoses over the pools. Everybody thought that this was God sent to everything. Did it cure malaria? As we know, malaria is hardly existent in our country. If you also notice at the time, most people put screens and air conditioning in.
My name's Jonah from Rock Hill. I graduated college a couple of years ago, and
Congratulations.
thank you. And I've been looking for ways of doing what I can for the environment, and I can honestly tell you I've done very, very little. With the recent elections and how Congress is going right now.
The ones in 1964?
He means Kennedy, and he's talking about Kennedy.
In any election, go ahead, finish your question. We are in 1963, and Mr. Kennedy has one more year. And we do hope he runs again, of course. But what would you like to do in the world of politics?
I apologize. I wasn't
That's okay.
aware of the time frame.
What role would politics have in making things better? How could a person get involved in contemporary politics?
Basically.
I think the question that you're asking is so important because we all feel fairly helpless. You think, well, you're a published author, of course you get to be important. What am I going to do? This is something that all of us need to do. We must speak out. We cannot just trust those in authority to have our best interests. We must first educate ourselves, and then we do whatever it is that we can do. And I do think the most important thing you do is get your head on right. And the way you do that is spend some time in nature every day. Go out in the beauty of the world around us. Breathe. And what it is that you need to do will come to you. And then go out and do it. Don't be afraid.
At this time, we are going to bid adieu to Ms. Carson, but we are fortunate that someone who can perhaps more directly address the current political climate and who has studied Ms. Carson's work extensively will be joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce you to Caroline McIntyre, who is our presenter tonight.
Rachel Carson is a hero of mine. I was a young teacher of history, and I had to teach a course on a chapter on the environment. And the only book I had was Rachel Carson's. I think she was an incredibly brave soul. But I'm going to do something even braver than Rachel Carson. I'm going to take my wig off in public.
Oh, my goodness.
Now we
All
have
right.
Caroline.
Now we can go into all the things that you may want to talk about what's going on today and what Rachel might have had to say about it. Questions?
I'm Carol. I'm Carol. I'm from Greenville. I think I read in our brochure that your book has never been out of print, so it's been in print for a good while. Is there some sort of foundation or something that the royalties go to help environmental causes or?
Yes, they go to a land conservative. Yes. She had no relatives. Her, she had a really weird brother. Her only living relative was a 6-year-old, 10, 11, Roger Christie. So she took care of him. She actually had to find someone to take, she didn't know who was going to care for Roger when she died. She was dying of cancer at the time she was writing this book. She died a year and a half right after that, which is why I wear pink. Her favorite color was pink, and she was fighting cancer at the time. So she took care of Roger, and actually her publicist, Paul Brooks, is the one who adopted him and raised him, because there was no one else. She had one mean brother who, as they would say, he's the kind of guy that would steal chickens from his mother. She gave the household goods to him, and the day after she died, he came into the day after they read the will, he came in the house, Roger was watching television, that's my television, took it away. So the rest she's given through a land conservatory.
You quoted this lady who stood against thalidomide. This is not enough information, There are many people who say that we should forgo fracking, even though it's given us $1.86 gas, because we just don't know. At what point do you forgo implementing something because you say, well, you never know, something could turn up that would make it not good?
It is why it is so important for us to support our scientists outside of the economic world of creating things that can be marketed and sold. That our scientists really, and that's why I mentioned Francis Kelsey, Here's somebody who just stopped something just because she was a clerk. And she just kept, every time they submitted the application, she had one stamp. She could either approve it or send it back for more information. So every time she got it, she just sent it back. Because she knew, she had had training in prenatal work and everything. She knew there was a problem. So it's important that we support our scientists, support science free of, and we must continue to look at who's doing this, who makes money out of it, and be able to make good decisions about our planet, because it's the only home we have. Fracking is something she would not know anything at all about. In my opinion of it is no better than anybody else's, probably not as good as yours. But she would say you must support science, you must read, you must inform yourself, and when you decide that something's wrong, then you must go out and say it.
Larry from Easley. I was just wondering, did anybody ever think when this massive chemical warfare started on insects, that you take out the beneficial insects, like the honeybee, which is a pollinator, which is dying out now, you don't see them anymore, or like ladybugs, which many people don't know, but they're a very beneficial bug. That didn't this ever dawn on any of these people?
Well, according to Rachel was a zoologist first and then a marine biologist. And one of the things she kept saying is that, you know, instead of funding all of this chemistry, we should start funding some biology, but there really is no profit in it. And one of the things that fascinates me about the fire ant, and we live in the South, nobody loves a fire ant. They came in on a ship in Mobile, Alabama in the late 20s and like that. Interesting thing about them, at the same time the South was suffering from boll weevil. Guess what the fire ant's favorite meal is? Boll weevils. If somehow we had figured out in 1929 how to get those little ants to just go get the weevils, then the whole thing would work out all by itself. Instead, in 1945, the 50s, we decided that we should kill them all off. And yes, you're absolutely right. The biology of it doesn't make any sense. If you kill, and DDT and all of these, their sister drugs, poisons, are all massive killers. They kill everything. Whatever survives, survives. But insects are Darwinists. They know that they can mutate. The strongest survive, and then those are the ones that you have to go out and kill too. So it's ignoring biology in favor of chemistry, because chemistry creates products that can be sold and are profitable. Biology, not so much.
I'm Mary Ellen from Piedmont, and I'm wondering if the new problem of, thank you, the Zika virus. This is another mosquito that's come up from the tropics, and I'm wondering how long you think we're going to kind of be so afraid and really discouraged by what to do.
Don't you wish we'd spent the last 50 years finding something else besides DDT? Rachel would be the first one to say, I'm not against, I'm not for insects. I don't think they should take over the earth. I'm for keeping ourselves alive. And investigating this and doing the science and spending the money on the things that are important. And when things like this come up, of course, well, DDT is going to solve a lot of it, but it's going to poison our environment, and we should have had a better solution by now. She would be appalled that we are still trying to figure this out. And she'd be very upset that this many people are affected by it.
Great performance, thank you. Do you think Rachel Carson had any idea? She died in 1964, I think.
Mm-hmm.
She was subsequently awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, endless honors, and inspired a whole generation, multiple generations of people to pursue environmental careers. Do you think she had any idea she would have that kind of an impact?
No, I think she did what she had to do because with what gifts, I think she was angry. I think she was upset. She knew that there was a connection between these things and nobody was listening. She had a skill set that was unique at that time. And people often wonder, why is it Rachel Carson in this book that is so, I mean, how many people read this book in the 70s? Go ahead, raise your hands. Yeah, we know it. Why did this happen? And it was almost like a God-given thing. She had spent all of her life in science and writing. She had worked for the government in their publications. She spent all of her life taking hard science and making it so it would fit in the Reader's Digest or the Ladies' Home Companion so the people would read it. So when it came time for this book to be written, she had the skills to do it. She did it because that's what she could do. And I think to answer the question of the young man back here, you have to do what you have the skills and the ability to do. You must use them to further the benefit of the world. I don't think she would have ever thought that her book would be read today. In fact, she would hope that it wasn't. Now, she would hope that you'd still be reading The Sea Around Us and the Edge of the Sea, The Handbook to the Ocean, and Under the Sea Wind. She would hope those books would be read. She'd be horrified to think that we still need to read Silent Spring.
My name is Gene. I'm from Charlotte. This is sort of a peripheral scientific question maybe, but it is an issue of the day. But it's interesting to me, but kind of ironic, that Ms. Carson, evidently from the 900 letters that she and another significant female in her life exchanged, the suggestion is that maybe she had to hide that relationship because at that time we made some progress in the LGBT issue, but that would have held her back. You think?
Well, I think it's very interesting that whenever you meet a female that is famous and unmarried, you start to ask questions. And yet seldom, when you meet a male that is single and unmarried, that you ask those questions. Rachel Carson, when she graduated from college, she was one of those few people that got to do this, and she owed all of her college money back. She shortly after that was supporting a family of 7 or 8 people. She had a mother-in-law that was over-dominating and 2 teenage daughters to raise in the middle of the Depression. So you think she was a really good catch? You think anybody was going to ask somebody like that to get married? She didn't have a lot of choices there. So she grew up a single woman, and she was driven and worked all the time and had a family support. So by the time that she was in 1952 and she finally had some money coming in, she bought a house and she started making, she always had friends. And yes, she did have a very powerful relationship with Dorothy. They were kindred spirits, and there were letters. And it was probably one of the first people that she ever had outside of, supporting her family and working like that. So she had a very strong, positive relationship with that. But Rachel would be the first person to say, answered her saying, well, how come you never married? He said, well, I never had any time. So I think it's always it always comes up. It always comes up.
After Silent Spring came out, did she not sort of avoid mentioning the fact that she was battling cancer as a strategy regarding the book?
Yes, she never once in her entire life mentioned that she had cancer. She would talk about her arthritis, she would talk about her aortitis, she went blind. She'd talk about her ulcer that came on and didn't have the sense to wait till after the book was published. So she was in very ill health, but she also was under massive radiation and chemotherapy. And the thing that galls me more than anything, she was diagnosed earlier on, and she went to her doctor at a time when women were not told things without a male relative present. Now, at the time that she developed her first breast cancer, her nearest male relative was her 6-year-old grandnephew. And so she went to the doctor's appointment alone. And that doctor would not talk about mastectomies or anything like that with her because she did not have a male relative with her. Now, I'm sorry, this woman is my mother's age. That was what happened with her cancer. And when she finally said, there's something wrong here, and she got herself up to the Cleveland clinic and got tested, and the doctor, Rachel Carson, who was a friend of hers, said, this should have been diagnosed 10 years ago, this should have been done 10 years ago, you might have lived through it. But her cancer was dominant in this book, and why many people think that she had an axe to grind about pesticides. She was looking for a link between pesticides and cancer, and the jury is still out. So if that helps with that, she was very ill, and and a year and a half later she was dead.
You said dominant mother-in-law, you mean mother, right?
I'm sorry, you're absolutely right, yes, mother. Her mother was a very, very powerful influence on her. As a young girl, they would go out in the woods together and they'd do the bees and the birds and everything like that. And her mother went through everything to get her into college. Her mother actually went to college with her. On weekends, she would come in and stay in the dorm with Rachel. And she was with her all of her life. It was one of the reasons she could work that hard, because her mother was there to take care of the kids in the house and everything like that. And the most important thing her mother did, Rachel is a writer. She is that's why her books are published still, because it's great writing. Her secret, any of those of you that are writers here, let me tell you what the real secret of writing is. You must read it aloud to somebody. Every single word that Rachel wrote, she read to her mother. And her mother heard it. And if her mother just squinched up her nose a little bit, Rachel would think, oh, I gotta go read that. You know. Her books are so beautiful because they can be read and heard, and music, sounds. We talk about the power of words. These words just roll off your eyes. And it's because she read them to her mother. And when her mother died the last 2 years, it was sore loss to her for the finalization of this book. Which is why some of the ending chapters don't quite have the magic of the beginning ones.
And once again, our presenter for tonight, Caroline McIntyre.
God bless the grass that grows through the crack and roll the concrete over